My name is Ian McLean, and I'm the President and CEO of the Greater Kitchener-Waterloo Chamber of Commerce. This session today is very timely. Last week I had probably 3 days of Zoom scheduled calls and now have a very bad back. So I'm really eager to have this discussion today. Many businesses and organizations have many or all of their staff working at home. So that work-life balance and having appropriate spaces to work safely as it relates to ergonomics is certainly an important issue. Before we do get started, I would like to take a moment to acknowledge that we live and work on the traditional territory of the Neutral, Anishinaabe, and Haudenosaunee peoples as we seek a renewed relationship based on the foundation of mutual understanding and respect. Today's session would not be possible without the continued support of our sponsors and partners. And so a special thank you to our title sponsor for the Business Success Series, Manulife, and our platinum sponsor for the series, the Immigration Partnership of Waterloo Region. These organizations are committed to supporting our local economy and providing businesses with the resources and tools they need to thrive. Ordinarily, we are joined by Bianca Moldovan. She's a corporate social responsibility manager with Manulife. She can't join us today, but we are thrilled to have Manulife on board for this series. They're tremendous partners of the Greater KW Chamber and support local businesses during this difficult time and all the time through a variety of supports. Just before the session begins, I'd like to tick over a few quick reminders. Please ensure that your microphone is muted throughout the presentation so we can reduce any background noise. If you have any questions that come up through the session, you can type them into the question box in your control panel at any time. If you have a tech-related problem, a representative of our team will be right back to you momentarily to get it sorted out. If there are questions for today's presenter, they will be gathered throughout the session, and I'll try and get those to our speaker, and so we can answer as many of those questions as possible throughout the presentation. All attendees will be sent a recording of today's presentation, and it will also be made available on the Greater KW Chamber website. I'd like to now introduce today's guest speaker, Jessica Vandenbush. Jessica is an occupational therapist with a background both in ergonomics, mental health. Most of her career has focused on recovery from trauma, helping people return to meaningful activities such as work, while managing outstanding issues such as chronic pain. She is a strong advocate for maximizing potential and preventing injury. She hopes society continues to learn about and prioritize these opportunities in addition to recovery. Outside of her formal occupational therapy roles, she enjoys research, community involvement, and training for triathlons. Please join me in welcoming Jessica.
Great, thanks for that introduction, Ian. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the webinar about ergonomics for the work performance. The objective of the webinar is to provide education for viewers to make ergonomic choices that help maximize worker performance and that help prevent injury. In doing so, we hope this benefits worker health, well-being, engagement, and performance in daily life that includes work. As mentioned, I'm an occupational therapist, and to abide by my college's requirements, I just need a moment to go over a disclaimer and consent. So for the disclaimer, although I'm a registered occupational therapist, my role in offering this presentation is to provide information, not to offer clinical services. The presentation is not a substitute for obtaining a diagnosis or addressing specific symptoms. Attendees are encouraged to obtain advice from a qualified healthcare provider for any specific issues. Benefits of this presentation include increased awareness of ergonomic principles and strategies that can promote well-being and performance. Risks are potential frustration that comes with new learning, although you can ask me questions at the end, so hopefully I can help with that. And also potential injuries if you apply principles incorrectly. But again, just ask questions if you have them, and I can help you apply things in your workplace. Participants are asked to reflect on their own work setup during the presentation and to engage in the question and answer period at the end. You can also email or phone me with questions about the principles discussed during the presentation. Participation isn't mandatory. You can shut off, actually you've been asked to shut off your audio and video, and you can also leave at any time. I do need to keep an attendance record for my clinical file, which isn't shared unless mandated by law. I will be getting a list of companies, but if you prefer I don't record your company name or your name, please just let me know. You can do that by email or by indicating in the chat. And it would also be helpful if you want, you can send your name and I can include that in my attendance records. It's my understanding that the webinar is recorded and shared. So by continuing to participate, you consent to that recording as well. Comments in the chat are not able to be seen by future viewers either. So I'll just give you a moment to make whatever adjustments you need considering that information and to ask any questions in the chat if you need to do that. Okay, so as for an agenda, I'm just going to go over my background, and then I'll talk about an occupational therapy perspective for ergonomics, different variations that you can use in your home and in your workplace, physical considerations, cognitive considerations, and things that you can do from an institutional perspective. And my references are at the end as well if you want to look things up further. So what makes me qualified to teach about ergonomics, especially for those who are a little bit concerned about that bike fit picture? I just wanted to share my background and let you know that my bike fit has improved since the picture was taken and is much more ergonomic right now. My first experience with ergonomics started in my Bachelor of Science in Kinesiology, which I got from the University of Waterloo, and had an interest there in biomechanics. I have biomechanics lab experience and I'm a functional capacity evaluator. I then went and did my Master's of Science in Occupational Therapy at McMaster and have been practicing that for about 5 years. I am a car fit technician, and I also have my previous experience as a kinesiologist. The reason I went into occupational therapy actually was because working as a kinesiologist, working with physiotherapists, chiropractors, and massage therapists, I noticed the link between physical health and mental health. A lot of people had chronic pain, and I wanted to learn about how to address issues that were affecting them on the whole. So affecting them mentally and physically, so that whether or not their pain was addressed, they could still participate in the things that made them who they were. Ergonomics is a prime example of how someone can have chronic pain and can work with it, but also suffer at work and outside of work with that pain. And so it's a really important area to address so that people are able to function at their best performance. So ergonomic, the adjective, means that something is designed in a way that is comfortable and efficient to use. The field of ergonomics is an applied science about designing those efficient and comfortable tools, anything from cars to bicycles to office equipment to a hammer, but designing it efficiently and comfortably with our human bodies in mind so that we can use them again and again effectively. And then we have ergonomics through the lens of the Canadian Model of Occupational Performance and Engagement. This is an occupational therapy framework, and I'm using it to situate our discussion today, since it helps describe an occupational therapist's unique position to assess and act on someone's environment. So we already know that someone's physical and even cognitive abilities and emotional abilities affect how they work and how they do other things that are meaningful to them. OT is special in the sense that it can help address the environment too. So examples of that would be lighting, noise, workplace culture, and social interactions, together with their physical, cognitive, and mental health symptoms. Spirituality is right in the middle, because when people aren't able to do what they need or what they want to do, it can often impact the idea of themselves. So in that sense, I'm concerned with the whole person. Occupational therapy relates to ergonomics for work because people need to feel accomplished and to provide for themselves and others. Since much of our work days are spent doing office work, ergonomics in this sense is going to be centered around an office-like environment. So while considering injury prevention at work, we also want to consider productivity and comfort, plus recovery and participating in meaningful activities after work that assist both with physical and mental recovery, and that also assist with consistently being able to do one's work day in, day out for weeks and years. So for example, if someone is not able to participate in yoga because their shoulders or wrists hurt from working on their keyboard and their computer, then they're less able to reap the physical, emotional, and cognitive benefits that they might feel from yoga. And then in this example, they're less refreshed when they go back to work because they didn't get that recovery time and less productive, etc. On the other hand, if someone is feeling good after work, they're more likely to go home and to take care of themselves using physical activity, cooking a good meal, etc., and then come back to work feeling refreshed and ready to go. Keep in mind that throughout the presentation, I am the expert in occupational therapy here, but you're the expert on yourself and your workplace. So some examples I provide might ring true and some might not. Some suggestions might work and some might not. I encourage you to try what you think is appropriate for your workplace. And after or in conjunction with that, you can seek more individualized help as well. What I've seen so far in practice is that outside help, in those cases, outside help was me coming in to offer an opinion, has been useful to identify issues and behaviors that a worker might not be aware of. Like maybe they kind of put their head forward when they're working, or they lean to one side. I've seen people who are reaching over a coffee mug to get to their mouse, and they don't really realize it, even though they do know many ergonomic principles. So that has been helpful in helping to make people aware of those things. It's also been helpful when someone has a niggling injury or discomfort, or when they're returning to work after being off, and if the typical setup just isn't quite right for their body. So speaking of the traditional setup not being optimal for everybody, I want you to just take a moment and think about this picture and what comes to mind when you see it. You can enter some details in the chat, or you can just think for a moment. So it's a classic slide about ergonomics with classic recommendations. You see largely 90 or more than 90-degree angles, and you see someone sitting, working on a computer. What I think when I see it is that it's a little boring and stuffy, and okay, people understand a lot of these things already. We got it. Most of us can follow instructions and we can set ourselves up like that, but still people are feeling injured and not rested or productive at work. Still workplace, office-related injuries are happening. The truth is that most of us don't sit like that, and not everybody's body looks like that. And one more thing is just, when's the last time you saw a keyboard tray? It's a little outdated. It's great. It's a great start, but I want to be able to offer you more with this presentation. So this is a slide of various different postures that we often take, whether at work or at home. It's much more realistic. And some of these postures are even evidence-based recommendations. And switching between them is quite important too. So the classic one that I showed before is common, and it's a posture that can be held for quite a long period of time, which makes it one of the more optimal postures, but any kind of static posture isn't recommended. The limit, even on the slide I showed before, the more optimal posture, is about 50 minutes. So even if you're set up in the classic ideal posture, it's still better for you to get up for at least a minute every 50 minutes. You might identify more with postures to the right on this screen. Some are healthier than others. Like, I wouldn't recommend sitting cross-legged and leaning forward very often. And you probably won't get much done laying down either, but you can use those things, those postures, to mix things up a little bit. And so if there is no optimal posture, why not? I'm assuming that's your question, even though I can't see you. One of the reasons that there isn't an optimal posture, and why even these postures that look very suboptimal, there is a reason why we can use them, and that comes down to the viscoelasticity of our tissues. So when we're in a certain position, our tissues adapt to that. And viscoelasticity means that the longer something is held in a certain position, well, it means that the longer something is held, the easier it is to stretch it more. So our tendons and ligaments are viscoelastic. So if they're in a stretch position, it means that if we hold them in that position, they'll be able to stretch even more. And that is not necessarily a great thing when we're in a working position. In a static posture, our body adapts to that posture, and then when we go to move, it's more difficult to move in certain ways. So if you're sitting with your hips flexed, then that's often when people get up to move to stand up, it's harder for them to stand straight because their tissues, since they've been flexed for so long, aren't able to as easily extend and to be in a straight vertical line. Another issue with static postures is that they can reduce circulation, and that contributes to injury too. One more opportunity for injury is when movements are really repetitive throughout the day. So even a really light demand on our body needs time to recover. And so if we keep repeating that movement without enough recovery time, tissues become stressed and weakened. So if you've ever seen the example of holding a popsicle stick, and you bend it and bend it and bend it, and then usually it pops back, but eventually it breaks, that's the classic demonstration of a repetitive stress injury. You just keep doing the same thing and you don't think it's doing harm, but then eventually it does. So then moving in different ways and using different posture changes up the stress and strain on the body, and that allows different body parts to rest while other body parts are being used more. Exercise changes the movement too, or addresses the movement part as well, and that promotes circulation and tissue health too. So you can get movement by using different postures, and you can also get movement by actually doing prescribed exercises. So how does this all fit in with that occupational therapy model that I showed? Most of what we talked about so far is related to physical concerns. So that's on the far left. Examples of common physical concerns with workplace setup include pain while working. So common areas of pain are the neck, the shoulders, the wrist, the upper back, lower back, and the legs. You can get pain at or after work. There's also limited range of motion at or after work, reduced productivity, absence, and mental health issues that come with the pain and not being able to do what you want and need to do in your day. Next over, we have cognitive concerns. So that's also dealing with the worker. Examples of this include headache, eye strain, mental fog and fatigue, irritability, difficulty problem solving, and mental health issues, kind of like the physical piece with not being able to participate in what you want to do. And then common institutional issues are no or minimal break time. And this isn't necessarily the workplace or institution's fault. Often now it's part of culture to not take a break or take a working break, eating while you're at your desk. And that's something that we can address as a team. There's also embarrassment to stand out for stretches, so it's not common to just stand up and start waving your arm around, even though that's what would be very helpful for you. There's lack of clear expectation or priorities, which leads to more interruptions in your day, and reduced ability now to use common areas. So if people are at work and they're not able to use a break room, or they're a little bit more hesitant about walking around the hall because of the potential of spreading COVID-19, then they're less likely to take those breaks and to get physical activity. So ideally, if there were a better fit between the worker and the setup, the ergonomic setup and policies at work, we'd all have a variety of near optimal postures that we can rotate through. We'd have no pain at or after work. We'd be able to work efficiently throughout entire days, weeks, and years for a career. There'd be less absences or no absences, and no lost time due to injuries. We'd also be more patient and better at problem solving. So this is what we're all working towards with these ergonomic solutions. This is one of my favorite slides because it has some low-hanging fruit that you can address at your workplace. So I've separated some of the easier solutions between physical, cognitive, and institutional strategies. For the physical side of things, I'd say that you can do more standing and movement. Like I mentioned before, at least try to stand for at least a minute every 15 minutes, but preferably if you can get up for 5 minutes every 50 minutes, that would be much better. You can use low-cost devices such as a footstool, keyboard, and a detached mouse rather than a trackpad. And the key to these is to use them properly. So a well-placed binder, for example, as a footstool is much better than an ergonomic device that was bought as a footstool. If that ergonomic footstool is too close or if it's too high, it's much better to kind of know what you're trying to do and to do it with things you have around the office than it is to just buy something and think it works because of the marketing. Likewise, for equipment, any ergonomic chair needs to be adjusted properly. Screens need to be at the appropriate height for the person. In most cases, like I said, a mouse is better than a touchpad, but mouse and keyboard positioning are also important. There's also nutrition and hydration. So I'm not an expert on the nutrition piece, but I do help with behavioral strategies to get the hydration and nutrition in. And you can also always ask someone who knows more detail about what to eat and how often to drink and things like that. But a lot of that is something that we know. It takes some time, practice, and support around people to get them to actually do it. Some simple cognitive solutions are to use a simple font, to adjust the font and window size appropriately. So when I say appropriately, oftentimes having a bigger font can help someone lean back in their chair a little bit more, but if they say have an example with looking around, with tracking with their eyes, then maybe a bigger font might not be as helpful. So you just need to judge your audience or judge your worker for that. You can use appropriate computer accessibility features too, like read aloud with headphones, speech to text, background contrast, and a lot of computers also have a simple view. Appropriate lighting is important. Break is also important for someone's brain and mental health. And nutrition and hydration goes under this category, as well as limiting clutter. So the less visual distraction, the better. Other potential cognitive solutions are to add an additional monitor and to use various paid software, but I didn't put them on the slide because they're more expensive. From the institutional side, evidence supports having an accommodating work environment. So that means asking employees what they need and what would make them more able to work, what would be supportive for them. This is tricky because everyone has different needs, but if you ask, then you can identify patterns and anticipate issues rather than being more reactive to issues. There's also the culture piece of setting a good example, excuse me, setting a really good example about what to do. Excuse me. Yeah, so if people see a leader standing up and stretching, they're much more likely to do it themselves. These are just a few examples of a workplace, work from home setup. I just want you to look and to think about what you like that is probably an effective ergonomic strategy, and what you might change about these pictures. I'll give a moment, and Ian, if you can just let me know if anyone has entered anything in the chat yet. Actually, I see the chat here and I don't see anything.
Yeah, nothing yet, but we've got some questions, okay, and that may spark things when you're concluded.
Okay, sure. Yeah, I just wanted to know if they had questions or comments about the pictures that are up right now. So I'll just mention a few things. So if you look at the picture on the left, it's an example of using the ground to sit or lay to do some work. There is a detached mouse, so the person would not need to use a trackpad on the computer. You also see a few pieces of exercise equipment. There's a resistance band and a foam roller, which are great for those mini stretch breaks, just to get some more circulation and more comfort, or just something to do while you're waiting and stretching a little bit. And there are prescribed exercises hanging on the wall as a reminder. Even with those things though, working on the floor, like that picture on the left or the one in the middle, it's not great for a long period of time. I just wanted to include it because it is a possibility and it is a way to mix things up. Especially for the slide in the middle, there's someone sitting with, I'm assuming their children, and it's an example of if you really need to, you can include some work-life balance, and maybe that is healthy for this person, and from an ergonomic standpoint for a short time, I think it's fine too. On the right, we have my setup actually with a computer, document holder. The mouse is detached and the keyboard is detached, even though you can't see it. This chair is set up appropriately and it has a neck rest, which I find very helpful when I remember to use it. And an example of how to get your physical activity in. Even with all of these, though, there are plenty of things to change, so we can talk about that later too. And these are a few pictures of potential workplace setups. So something that I want to really hit home is that it doesn't have to be expensive. The picture on the left has a standing desk for me, although it isn't the typical standing desk. It was just a shelf that was there that I decided to use, but it's almost the right height, and it's a really great option to sitting the whole day. We also have the classic seated setup and a picture of me demonstrating some exercises. So this one is arm circles to help with moving backwards and stretching out the front of my chest. I also wanted to mention the COVID-19 home ergonomic assessment program that we have at the Armory. It's one of the many resources out there. It's an ergonomic assessment program that I created, and it's done online. It's evidence-based with outcome measures. I'm pretty biased towards this one because I made it, but other resources include employee assistance programs, so I encourage you to look into those programs. You can also research ergonomists and other professionals such as physiotherapists, chiropractors, massage therapists to address physical issues, and people like nutritionists or naturopathic doctor for any nutrition issues you might have, or maybe you don't have issues but you have some questions. They can provide answers for you. Many insurance companies cover occupational therapy and other helpful professionals, like I mentioned, so you can check your insurance for whether or not you're covered. So that's the end of the more formal presentation part, and so I think Ian has some questions for me, and we can get into discussion about that.
Well, and that's great. We appreciate the overview, and maybe we can get on with a few questions. And I'm standing today, and I would say yesterday and today at the start of the meeting, and I guess this is part of the cultural piece. I said I'm having some issues with my back, and just told people I'd be standing because I think it would have been unusual because I'm usually sitting. But so I guess one of the questions when you do have some of these issues arise, what's the best advice? As an example, chair can be a big problem if you don't have a good chair. There's standing desks, stools. You've talked about exercise balls or kneelers. Is that individual to the person, or are there some standard things which are that you recommend right off the bat in terms of having the right chair with the right features, as an example?
Sure. I do have some things to say right off the bat. I decided to stand as well because we want to create a culture where standing is acceptable and accepted. So if anyone's listening, they can stand and join us too. But I think that's a great idea, so thanks for that. When it comes to just a few recommendations, I would first like to dispel some myths. So there used to be a trend about exercise balls as well as kneeling. My opinion is that you can use both if it works with your body, and sparingly as well. The research that I've read about the exercise balls is that it's not better for you than a chair. It's just that sometimes it can help promote movement, which the movement piece is better for you. With the kneeler, I'm even more hesitant with that one because a lot of us have sensitive knees. And so I'm not sure that I don't think that would be better than a chair, but again, it depends on your body as well. Mostly.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, mostly I would say that you need a couple different options, and you need to be you can do it all with the chair, but it needs to be adjustable. And so you can adjust it, and you can take standing breaks as well.
So you talked about the assessments, and obviously COVID, many of us are working at home. You're working at home, and getting out to see people. For many businesses, you're just not able to do that with either the shutdown orders or some of the restrictions in different fields. So maybe talk about the assessment, because I think that's what you're getting at. It's individual to the people, to the person in question. So an assessment is one of those tools that's important. How do you do that during COVID these days? Number one, and then many of these, I think you've listed them, but I think some of these assessments might be covered, whether it's employee assistance programs. Companies will provide them on their own dime, or there's other programs that might cover some of that. So maybe talk about COVID assessments, why that's important to get to the right solution.
First of all, do what you can first. Do things like clean up your desk, so you don't need to worry about reaching over papers to get to your mouse and keyboard and things. Follow some of those examples that you think are appropriate that I listed earlier. And then your question about how do we do an ergonomic assessment during COVID times. Usually people can use their computer screen, or they can have an additional screen to show me their setup. Even on the computer screen, it works because I can see your posture. So you can actually be looking at me, or you can be reading from the computer, and I can tell. So right now, my shoulders are okay. I'm just going to show you my shoulders are at a fairly neutral position. If your keyboard is too high, or if you're reaching to type, look at how my shoulders move to reach like that. So I can see things like that. I can also look at repetitive motions. Say if you're reaching for the phone quite a bit, if you're reaching for the mouse. A lot of it's talking as well. So if someone has pain somewhere, they can let me know where that is, and then they can show me with the camera more zoomed out if I need to see that area. Say it's the low back, that's a little bit harder, but they can still show me their chair, and I can give some information about how to adjust that to be a good relative height to their body, considering their height, as well as to the desk, considering the desk height, and also leg clearance. So a lot of it, there is quite a bit of discussion, and there's some measuring. I can show you how to measure things if you need to do that as well.
Now, one of the things, and I have one, I must admit I don't use it very much, but I'm getting.
Uh-oh. You cut out. Can you repeat that for me, Ian?
Can you hear me?
I can hear you now, and I can see you now.
Okay. Sorry about that. Standing desks is one of those things looking at. One of the things that I have one, I don't use it very often, and I think it's partly because I'm not comfortable with it when I'm actually using my computer. But for things like this, where I've been standing the whole time, I will, because it's better on my back. What are some of the considerations when you're talking about a standing desk, and where it makes sense, and for what activities?
Right. I think that's a really good application that you're doing already, is to use the standing desk when you're doing presentations, and you don't necessarily need to use the keyboard. Just like we get tired when we're sitting, we get tired when we're standing too, even more so because we're not used to standing all day. So when you start with a standing desk, I would start not doing it all day, but maybe 30 minutes at a time. And then you can work up to it just like you would work up to more physical activity. So you can do a standing desk for a little while, and then when you notice your posture start to fail, or at the 30-minute mark, if you're not so confident in keeping track of your posture, then you can sit for a little while and try again. Another thing is to elevate one of your legs just a little bit to relax the muscles that flex your hips. So if I'm just going to share my screen really quickly again and go back to the picture of me with the makeshift standing desk. So I have my left leg just, I wouldn't go any higher than that. It's almost a foot off the ground, but you can go about 6 inches off the ground. And that can help with relaxing your hip flexors a bit. If you can do it, it would also be great to have your keyboard separate from your computer monitor. One of the things that I anticipate is hard for you, you said you're not quite so good at working on your computer while you're standing. One of the things that makes that difficult is that if your keyboard is the same height as your monitor, then you do have to raise your shoulders up and use more of that energy to use your keyboard while you're looking at the monitor. Whereas if you have an attached tray that you can put the keyboard on, or if you have a laptop stand, then you can raise the monitor a little bit, and then you don't need to bring your hands up quite as high to be working on the keyboard. Does that ring true for your
Yeah,
situation?
I mean, I'm not very good with, I'm just an email, so I'm not great with keyboard to begin with, so I have to be in the right thing, but I think that it's the sitting when you're doing Zoom calls and staff calls and presentations, and it's just the constant, and I'm sure others feel the same thing, and we talk about
For
this
sure.
at our own staff meetings of how what are the things that they need when you're working at home and you don't have the same necessarily the same things you do in the workplace. So it begs the question, you've given some advice, and going through some of the assessment tools that you've talked about and trying to do some things differently, give yourself a break, whether it's on the cognitive side or the physical side. How do you know if the changes are effective? Like, is it a physical response saying, geez, my back doesn't hurt as much, or my eyes aren't as strained, or how would we know what works, and so you can kind of repeat the sequence so that you're feeling better on a regular basis?
Yeah, thanks. Just before I mention that, I want to say one more thing about the standing desk, and that, or about anything, any type of desk, and that is that you want to, if you have glasses that you should be wearing for close up, then you then wear them, and then that can help with not getting, as he just put his glasses on, that can help with not getting as close to the screen with your head and neck. But so going back to the question about measuring changes. So I take a baseline measure. You can do that yourself as well by thinking about what it is that hurts and rating that pain or discomfort out of 10 before you make changes. You can also think about different performance issues you might be having, like distractibility, or after lunch you're not very productive, things like that, and just take note. If you had all the time in the world and were interested in the impact of specific changes, I'd encourage you to make one change at a time. So move your keyboard closer and see how you feel at the end of a day or two, and do that same rating. Being respectful of other people's times, and the goal of getting performance and comfort over how important it is to know exactly what change was helpful. I make multiple recommendations at a time, just because we're not doing research on a specific change, we're just trying to make you feel better and work better. So I do give a few different recommendations at a time, but you can still do the idea of having a numerical rating before and after, and take a few days with that new change. At least a few days, even a week to see if there's a difference.
Now we're coming to the end of our time. We got another 5 minutes or so. One of the things that I think many would be asking is, and you shared some of these, but what would the most common or your favorite recommendations be? Like if someone said, "Look, I'm working at home," what would be the most common things you'd say? Your chair and your keyboard and your monitor, as an example. I mean, I think that's what people are looking for, is to say they may go through the assessment. But what we're looking, again, most people are looking for is what would be the top three as an example. What would be those things that would be that, to your term, the low hanging fruit to kind of start?
Yeah. I cannot understate the value of movement. So I said that a lot of people know it already. So I'll just give a hint of every time you look at the coffee cup on your desk, or every time you reach for a pen, stand up and take a little bit of a stretch break. It's just a way to help you remember to get up, or even if you take a sticky note that you have on your desk or a picture and you move it to a new spot, every time you notice that change, stand up. You don't need to stop what you're doing, but stand up.
Yeah, I think that's important, is the frequency of that. I mean, you kind of mentioned every 15 minutes or so, but it actually should probably be more frequent than that in terms of getting that movement, so you're not stuck in a position. So you're saying find some triggers that get you to at least move around.
Yeah,
the position definitely. That
you're in. For sure. And
okay,
then
now one other thing I think.
If you can do it, get a laptop stand or a separate keyboard, or both, so that your hands do not need to be at the same place that your face is looking.
Okay. Now, one of the things with chairs and working at home, I think the tendency certainly now has been use what you have at home, and a dining room chair is not the same as a desk chair when you're sitting in it for a long period of time. Do you have a recommendation, or what is the type of features that should be on a chair that you're spending 5-6 hours in a day? What are the features to look for? And
sure. You cut out a little bit, but I think I understand the question. My top thing that I look for is adjustability. So the more adjustable, the better, because it can suit you and it can suit you in different positions. I really like, of course, height adjustability. I like the waterfall seat front, so it doesn't cut into your legs quite as much. That's a big difference from a dining room chair. Armrests, it's great if you can take the armrests off, if you can move them back and forth, if you can move the angle of the armrests. Usually those things will really limit your choices down. So that's probably as much as you need to know to just end up with a couple chairs that you're choosing from. The back, though, you can also choose a back that can be locked versus that can swing back and forth. So depending on your preferences, just make sure that you do have the ability to lock it. And if you have neck or headache issues, you might want to consider a neck rest on your chair too, high back with a neck rest.
Listen, it's been great. I think we're just about out of time, and we appreciate you taking time out of your schedule and presenting for us today. Jessica, thanks so much for joining us. We appreciate it.
Oh, I'm really happy to have the opportunity. You can feel free to, I think there's going to be a follow-up email for any attendees. So if you have more questions, you can reply to that follow-up email and get in contact with me too.
Well, great. Thanks so much. And thank you again to our title sponsor of the series, Manulife, our platinum sponsor of the series, the Immigration Partnership of Waterloo Region, and to today's speaker, Jessica Vanderbush. And finally, to all of you for joining us today. As a reminder, we do host a new edition of the Business Success Series every Wednesday at 1 p.m. Join us next week for Hiring Great Employees and Leaders, how to select the right mix of experience and ability for a successful team. We hope to see you then. For full details and to register, please visit greaterkwchamber.com. Please share this series with your friends and colleagues, and join us every Wednesday afternoon for another edition of the Business Success Series brought to you by Manulife. Because if it's Wednesday, it's the Business Success Series. Thanks so much and have a great afternoon.